Hey guys, how's it going? Thank you for watching. You are about to check out a live Q&A fireside chat I just did with Ken Hertz. Ken is one of the top lawyers in Hollywood. He works with all the biggest talent from David Blaine, Will Smith, Gwen Stefani, and Black Eyed Peas. He's a very good friend and he's advised me on a lot of things on my business over the years. He also loaned me his office space many times before I could even own one. So I'm very grateful to him and his amazing office staff for giving us conference room space before we even had one at Neon Roots and Rootstrap. So tune in and check it out. COVID-19 is affecting everybody and we're covering a lot of really interesting things about the legal impact on hospitality, transactional law, real estate, content, entertainment, and a lot more. We've got resources for you to check out in the description below. So tune in and enjoy.
I'm Ken Hertz. I'm a partner in a law firm that represents primarily talent in the entertainment industry. We work with a lot of companies as well. About 25 years ago, we started a consulting business looking after Fortune 500 companies and new ventures that were looking for help navigating Hollywood. I have a background in electrical engineering and marketing, and I went to law school. I worked at a major record label. I worked at a major studio. I worked for Mel Brooks. I worked in lots of different contexts. I've done lots of different things in film and television, in music, in new media, and in technology. And so I have a kind of a varied background. My classmates ended up all over the place. Some in Silicon Valley in the very early days of venture economy and what used to be referred to as the convergence space. And a lot of my classmates ended up on Madison Avenue and on Wall Street. And for many of them, I was the only person they knew in the entertainment business. And so because I'm curious and because I had such a varied background, I've done lots of different things. So I can give you a generalist's view of what's going on. I'm not at a big firm. Our firm is a relatively small firm. As I said, we specialize in entertainment industry transactions, but we're not an employment law firm. We're not a tax law firm. We're not a litigation firm or a criminal firm or a corporate firm. We generally help our clients. What I like to say is that we work with celebrity entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial celebrities. And so we help them find the help that they need in many cases and oversee that work, but we are not in any of those specialties. We specialize in transactions and in particular intellectual property related transactions.
Awesome. Do you want to tell us what Membrane is as well?
Yeah, so Membrane became a receptacle for the work that I was being asked to do in the field of entertainment marketing primarily. Although it's evolved into a lot more than that. My partner in the company, Liz Heller, is a veteran of various parts of the entertainment industry and also one of the earliest innovators in the startup space and the venture world. And so she and I often found ourselves in settings where we were, whether it was TED or CES or South by Southwest or what have you, where people were talking about new media and the entertainment industry, but no one from the mainstream entertainment industry was there. And we, constantly found ourselves on the same side of the table or on opposite sides of the table and decided to align and put our networks together to help our friends and relationships navigate what was a very quickly changing world.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for that, Ken. So let's jump into some of the topics here. The one for me that I've been asked a lot before we obviously went live here is, what force majeure is and some of the new boilerplate clauses that are becoming more and more relevant in a lot of commercial contracts.
Okay, so a force majeure is a concept. It's not necessarily a provision in a contract, although many contracts have a specific force majeure clause. Force majeure is basically an act of God. In other words, what happens when something happens, a strike, a war, a pandemic, something that makes it impossible for one side or the other side or both sides of a contract from being able to perform their obligations under the contract. What should happen? The concept of force majeure is that if an unavoidable act of God makes it impossible for you to perform your obligations under a contract, then you are, in the most basic case, assuming you haven't agreed otherwise, you are excused from your obligations because it is not because of you. It is not because of something that you did, but the world changed, the circumstances changed, and had the parties anticipated that change, they would have agreed that the contract would not be applicable.
And are these provisions included in most contracts that you see, from startups to hospitality and real estate?
Well, you often have force majeure clauses in a formal contract. They wouldn't be in a term sheet in most cases. They would be in a formal agreement. You would often have a force majeure clause to avoid the possibility of having the application of force majeure be vague or, certain, depending on the circumstances. We often see force majeure clauses in real estate transactions. We often see force majeure clauses in talent agreements. We often see force majeure clauses in the best example for us would be like a tour agreement. What happens if the venue burns down before the act shows up? Is the certainly the act would not be obligated to perform at that venue, right? But if the act is ready, willing, and able to perform, then should the owner of the venue, whose venue burns down, which is not an unanticipatable event, and although it may be a complete accident, the place could have been, hit by lightning, or it could have been arson, or it could have been a cause that no one knows about. Should that be treated as force majeure, meaning should it excuse the venue owner from doing it? And is it something that the parties could have anticipated and insured for, right? You can get cancellation insurance, you can get fire insurance. I mean, there's, is the event that happened, should the parties have anticipated it, and could they have prevented it? And so rather than getting into an argument whether or not it is an act of God, it was out of the control of both parties, it isn't something that could have been fairly anticipated, you would see a force majeure provision in a contract. See, sorry, I didn't turn my phone. I didn't turn my phone off. Sorry. Hopefully somebody got that. Anyway, you would see a force majeure clause that would address that situation and would say, the following things are not force majeure, regardless of whether or not they were out of the control of the individuals, or anything that is beyond the party's control will be treated as a force majeure event, excusing the party, or perhaps it would first delay performance. In other words, it might say that if an event of force majeure, meaning out of the control of one side or the other, happens, then that party is excused for a period of time until the circumstances change.
Got it.
Right. But in real estate contracts, what you see often in landlord-tenant contracts is that a force majeure event excuses the parties from performance under the contract, except the obligation to pay rent.
Right.
And since most tenants, obligation is primarily to pay rent, I think we're going to see a lot of arguments about that. And I also think that what we're going to see in this environment is a lot of landlords being reasonable and working out with their tenants some kind of compromise or forbearance for a period of time. In the same way as I think a lot of banks are saying to people who have mortgages, we will let you not pay your mortgage for 90 days. But at the end of the 90 days, you have to catch up and you'll accrue interest in the interim. But there won't be anything derogatory on your credit if you don't pay your mortgage for 3 months or what have you. And I also think judges and courts are not interested in seeing people come in and, fight over evictions, what's called an unlawful detainer action. I don't think the courts want their dockets to be clogged by those things. And I also don't think courts are going to be very sympathetic to landlords, trying to evict people. I also don't think landlords want to evict their tenants. If nobody can afford to pay their rent during this period of time, they're going to be looking for the government to give everyone some relief. It should give landlords some relief, just like tenants. And although tenants are we have to be sympathetic to tenants who are seeing their revenues drop dramatically and therefore can barely afford to keep their employees. They also need money to help pay their rent. Landlords, when they bought the buildings, this was not reasonably anticipatable, and they shouldn't be the victims and carry all the burden either. So it's going to be very tricky. I don't think a lot of people are calling for states and municipalities to make evictions illegal and make the insistence on rent, make it impossible for landlords to treat rent as during this period, that they can't collect rent during this period. If they lose their right to collect rent, they in turn may have to pay their mortgage on the building. And so at some point, the buck has to stop somewhere. And it's probably an unconstitutional, what's called a taking, an unconstitutional taking for the government to say to a landlord, you've lost all this rent. I mean, that's probably unconstitutional. So, the problem with being capitalists is that capitalism has no conscience. And, when you think about it, we all went from being capitalists and socialism being a dirty word to seeing $4 trillion injected into the economy by the Fed and another $2 trillion injected into the economy by Congress. And I can't imagine it's going to stop there.
So the temperature read that you're getting is people are going to be more forgiving now, and nobody really wants to be litigating. There's a lot of bigger issues right now with just a crisis, a pandemic. And most people know that if they do try to litigate or bring action, it's going to be very difficult. One, because the courts aren't even open now. And two, a lot of, some firms, I know your firm has probably made the transition to remote has done quite well in that, but there are a lot that probably haven't.
Well, no, I think pretty much, law firms are largely, conversant in things like Skype and Zoom and remote working and what have you. We took us no time to get everybody set up to work from home. We shut down on the 13th and we haven't looked back. But, I don't think, I'm sure every firm isn't, but I think most law firms are working pretty hard during this period. I also think that most judges are hearing cases in writing. They're not open for people to come into court, but I think most courts are still operating. And I think a lot of people in these situations, unfortunately, America is the most litigious country in the world. I imagine that a lot of people are afraid that if they don't file lawsuits, they'll be too far back in line when it matters. And I also think you're right. I think courts are not going to be interested in dealing with a ridiculous backlog of, cases that are tone deaf to what's going on. I don't know how this shakes out, but I think that we are in for a very different world. One reason I say that is because you've got these extraordinary circumstances that aren't like anything we've ever seen before, certainly since the early part of the 20th century, where entire sectors are faced with the possibility of shutting down. The retail sector certainly is at zero revenue at the moment. The traditional retail sector, the online retail sector is getting squeezed as well because the manufacturing sector and the
supply chain,
yep. The supply chain sector is all grinding to a halt. And so, as it becomes difficult for people to go to work, for people to continue delivering Amazon packages, for Amazon warehouses to continue operating when people are being infected by the virus, we're going to go through a very strange period of uncharted waters where, forget what ends up going to court. I think what's more important is, when we come out the other side, who will there be worth suing, right? You have these entire industries, that the hospitality industry, the retail industry, the food and beverage industry, the travel industry, devastated. 5 minutes ago, Uber was actually, according to the statistics, every ride on Uber was generating a profit for the company. I don't think there are any Uber drivers actively driving.
And these were companies that were high cash burn. They weren't profitable pre-COVID. Now I think this is going to be the thing that sends them over, right?
I don't know. I don't know what happens to these companies. I know that there's $2 trillion allocated in this CARE Act. And I know that up to $10 million and up to 500 employees, a lot of these companies are going to be able to, get some relief for 8 weeks. But what happens after that? And how long does that go on? When you think about the 2008 housing crisis, or 9/11 before that, or, any of these historical government interventions here and abroad, what we know is that those were in the low, hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars. The wars that we initiated after 9/11, I think have cost close to $2 trillion. Well, Congress just allocated $2 trillion. The Fed just basically put another $4 trillion of liquidity into the marketplace, and banks have access to low interest money, but it's not going to stop there. And 5 minutes ago we were all saying that Bernie Sanders was crazy because we couldn't afford to fund healthcare for everybody, but apparently we can, and apparently we have the ability to print as much money as we want. We just don't know what the fallout's going to be from that, and we don't know what's going to happen when all these companies come back and are competing in a universe of addressable market sizes that it will dwindle dramatically, because everyone's a significant number of people are out of work, and companies that operated on a 8, 10, 12, 20% margin see revenues go down by 30, 40, or 50%. Then
should business owners be taking action today with respect to privacy policy or terms of service or service level agreements?
In what context? To accomplish what? In other words, are you concerned that the end user license agreement that people click is going to expose you legally?
Right.
And it wasn't before. What is the new conduct that will create a violation of your existing policy? Give me an example.
Well, I think just in terms of being in operation, a lot of even tech companies are having to change their product offerings, or a service might change next week. Everything is kind of happening in real time at the moment. So are there any things that we can be doing proactively? Sounds like no.
Well, I do think it's worth it if you have a lawyer to be talking to your lawyer about, what they're seeing and what they're hearing. Law firms are at the vanguard of communicating quickly. What I'm saying is the big law firms are being very generous and volunteering their opinion about how to interpret the CARE Act, what kinds of loans you should be applying for, how to qualify for those loans. They don't seem to be insisting that they only provide that information to their clients, et cetera. I think that there's a lot of information available online that is readily available to tell you how to apply for the existing SBA loans.
Right.
What kinds of how to navigate those loans applications to make sure that you don't run afoul of the application process, so that you qualify at the end for the grant conversion. In other words, some of these loans for payroll, for example, will convert to grants under the proper circumstances so that you don't have to pay them back. You know, there's
Exactly.
not only are there low interest loans available through the SBA, but in addition, the CARE Act provides that if you use a certain percentage of the money to maintain your payroll and you comply with the regulations, then you will qualify to have the loan converted to a grant and not have to pay it back. So that's real help.
We'll be posting these resources as well. So anybody that is interested, along with this deck, of course, on the SBA and the payroll tax relief, we'll be sharing that. Ken, what's been the morale like at your office, and what are you doing to keep people inspired? I've seen a lot of, sort of big shot CEOs on Twitter, I think, being too optimistic, and they're, oh, the economy's going to bounce back and we're going to be fine. And I don't think
that's what Americans do. I mean, we are the world's greatest optimists, and we like to work, and we are, we remain, I think, by most measures, the most productive workers in the world. We also, our people in America historically don't take vacations, even though they can, and they don't because they're afraid that if they take a vacation, they're going to get fired, or someone will come up with an excuse to think that they're lazy. And Americans remain optimistic and competitive and productive, and I'm sure that we will be, and I'm sure that as a result, there's a very good chance that our economy will, as it's always done, bounce back and potentially lead the world. But what I think we also will be is changed from this experience. This is not like any other event in my lifetime, and I'm not young. I lived through the Vietnam War. I lived through, did I get disconnected?
Nope, you're still good.
Oh, okay.
I think you're just blowing
Someone's
up.
calling. That's all. It's a phone call. Forgive me. So,
Gulf War, Vietnam War.
yeah, sorry. I lived through several wars. Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. I gotta call you back. Sorry, I've tried to turn that off. I apologize.
No worries.
Anyhow, what I was saying was I've lived through, the Nixon, resignation, and the Reagan administration, and the George W. Bush administration, and Clinton and Obama and now Trump. I don't think that any of this could have been scripted, let alone predicted. And I am confident that this event at this point is the defining event of my lifetime, and most adults' lifetimes. And I'm hoping that it isn't the precursor to things that are much worse. But I do think that we will come out of it having learned a great deal about how to be more humane and kinder and more and have greater empathy. And
one thing that concerns me, and I'm sure it does for you as well, is we're going to be implementing a lot more mass surveillance, and I totally understand and appreciate it's for the greater good in terms of our public health. If there is reinfection, if this comes back, but you're a tech guy, you're involved in a lot of tech companies. We're going to be granting a lot more freedom and access to tech companies to do a lot more crazy shit with us and track our whereabouts and our locations if we're positive, negative on tests. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it was inevitable. I mean, I think privacy's been largely, gone for a long time. I don't think, I mean, this may be, someone's rationale for invading our privacy even more. But I think that, there will be attacks, as there always have been, on our individual freedoms. America is the only country in the world that was really created by, based on an idea. And the libertarians that started this country believe that you should be free to do whatever you wanted, so long as you're not hurting anyone. And the problem is that, as always, we've managed to mangle that idea so that, there's now a competitive narrative, which is that freedom includes the freedom to be an asshole, the freedom to be selfish, the freedom to be greedy, that hurting other people is I guess means physical or physical harm or property damage, but really hurting other people means denying other people their freedom and their privacy, and not everyone sees it that way, and it may be that the idea has unfortunately run its course. It may be that we just need to learn to be kinder to each other, like other civilized societies, particularly the European democracies that seem to do a better job of thinking that there's a difference, an objective difference between right and wrong. I mean, the problem in this country is that because of who we are, we've perpetuated, and lawyers are largely responsible for this problem, I think, because in America we think that if you're getting away with it, you're not doing anything wrong, right. And our legal system believes that not getting caught in a lie should be treated as the same as telling the truth. And I don't mean to be cynical, but I think there are plenty of obvious examples of both of those things. And that is, and we've never seen it more visibly than what's going on right now in politics. But without being political, I think that it is really obvious that the law has to change, the lawyers have to change, the legal system has to change to be more compassionate and more empathetic. And we have to accept that there's provisions in our Constitution like the Electoral College and the Second Amendment that are truly remnants of slavery. And this idea that anybody should be able to have an arsenal in their basement. The first thing that happened in this current crisis is that Walmart ran out of ammunition. That's terrifying, right? But the idea that that we can unfortunately amend the Constitution to get rid of the Electoral College, which has resulted already in elections where the popular vote did not carry the day, or the Second Amendment, which has devastating social impact, the way it's been interpreted by states and courts, but really was a compromise with the southern states to allow them to have a militia to defend themselves against an invading federal army that wanted to make slavery illegal. It may be too late to get rid of those with our current system. It's obviously impossible to amend the Constitution. They haven't even passed the Equal Rights Amendment. It's still a state away from ratification. So, I'm trying to keep this on topic, which is, how will the law be affected by this crisis? And my answer to you is, I think that what needs to happen is that we have to figure out how to come out of this with a more rational consensus on what is our objective right and wrong. More than half of the federal budget is welfare and Social Security.
Yep.
The largest other being military spending. We are a socialist democracy, and lawyers have to figure out how to explain that to people, right? We've managed to contort ourselves into thinking that socialism is a bad word, but nobody's complaining about the $6 trillion that's already been injected into.
Yeah, they'll just rebrand. They'll rebrand it. They won't call it socialism, but
okay, right. But I'm just saying it's the Frank Luntzes of the world and the lawyers of the world that seem to create these euphemisms and use semantics against us, because we've also spent the last God knows how many years, at least 60 to my mind, of thinking that the government can't do anything right, and that nobody should have to pay taxes, and if you can get away with not paying your taxes, then you win. The problem is that this is what lawyers do best, and so the law has to change to have more and higher expectations of the law and the rule of law and lawyers, and I'm hoping that will be part of the the growth that we experience as a result of living through this. But it's going to be a very different world on the other side, because as I said, with so many people out of work, I mean, because of the CARE Act, people had to furlough or lay off or outright fire people by April 1st in some cases, and in order to be able to comply with the requirements of the application process and to comply with the grant thing I was referring to earlier. So as a result, I think this week's unemployment numbers are going to stagger people.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get worse between now and the end of this.
We'll learn a lot more after people aren't able to pay rent this week and bills. And
yeah, no, I mean, there's a domino effect.
Yeah.
When so many people don't have money, the idea of suing them for money they don't have is not going to be a good use of anyone's time. And I think most law firms and most lawyers will counsel their clients not to bother. And at the same time, I think there'll be a scramble of people that are afraid that if they don't file a lawsuit that they can't win or that's not worth it, that they will somehow lose their rights. And so it's going to be chaos in this arena for some time.
Let's talk about some industries.
Sure.
Obviously, hospitality, nightlife, we may not see a recovery for nightlife. You and I spoke about this before, and I don't know if we'll see the days of 250 plus capacity venues maybe for another year. Who knows? None of us have this information right now.
Well, I just think people gathering close together in any size group, we're learning, is a bad idea until the virus is contained and truly contained. Because what we're going to see is as this process of really sheltering in place becomes finally widespread, and the curve flattens and the number of infections reduces and the number of deaths reduces, I think that, as always, Americans will become somewhat complacent and somewhat bored or impatient or whatever is the right term. And we'll start to do stupid things. And, perhaps the summer weather, we don't know yet, but perhaps the summer weather is also going to reduce the transmittability of the virus. But it's likely to come back in the fall by all medical accounts at the moment. And, we could end up in a worse condition in the fall and winter than we are now,
right?
Before a viable vaccine or a viable treatment is widely available. And our
just response and the government's response, how slow it's been. We're still not fully, as far as I know, as of today, we're not full shelter in place in all states.
No, but we're witnessing the Peter principle in action, that everybody rises to the level of their own incompetence. And I know that this, in some quarters, this is a controversial statement, but, where is the voice or the voices standing up to this, current federal response to say, enough. This is, we've got an imbecile at the helm who's a narcissistic sociopath, and people are, for whatever reason, terrified. Chris Rock put it best. We've spent the last 50 years, trying to figure out how to protect our children from bullies, and now nobody knows how to deal with one.
The biggest bully.
Yeah.
Yep.
Are you going to respond to any of the questions, or do you want to just go keep?
Yeah, so we got 2 more slides, and then we're going to jump into some questions. So anyone who's got Q&A, go ahead and start posting now, and we're going to start jumping in. Let's tackle this one, and let's just start jumping into questions after this. What are your policies right now on, hunting, farming, outreach? I know for us, it's been a very sensitive thing. We're trying to do a lot more coaching and remote training. We obviously have a lot of experience in that arena. How are you handling this on the business development front?
Well, what we've done at our firm is that we have, we've managed, thankfully, to keep everyone employed. And I don't know how long we're going to be able to do that, but the partners have made the decision to take on the sacrifice of making sure that the staff remains employed. And we're doing what we can on the law firm side to keep everyone engaged and working and supported and comfortable as best we can. The lawyers are also all being encouraged to reach out to and work with their individual clients to come up with ways for them to do something that is not tone deaf, but is not necessarily, too serious. In other words, what we're hoping is, and I have clients, David Blaine, for example, who did a TV special last night, which if you haven't seen it, it's available online to stream for free, and it's really fantastic and really a great escape, where he did magic over Facebook with a lot of first responders and a lot of healthcare workers, and I think they really appreciated the respite. And the special itself is fantastic, but what he's talking about doing is if we can figure out how to do it, is a virtual birthday party for all the kids who didn't get to celebrate their birthday in a traditional way over the last month, by figuring out a way to do it online. We have another client who's about to announce an online show from his garage. They're frivolous in some ways, but I think, we could all use a little frivolity, because there's plenty of opportunity to, stay up all night watching the news, or reading, the worst case scenario information, or watching the economy from whatever angle. And so, the answer to your question is, our clients, our colleagues at the law firm have come up with a lot of business development ideas, but also primarily ideas to help our existing clients and our existing professional relationships understand that we are eager to engage with whatever bandwidth we have to both advise people who are panicked or concerned about their prospects or their future, and also help them come up with ideas. We have a big thought leadership practice. We look after Sir Ken Robinson and Esther Perel and Simon Sinek and others who are thought leaders who are being virtually selfless at the moment and trying to put as much content online and give people as much comfort as possible, because I think people are, run the gamut from being, frightened and panicked and just plain scared, to being, confused and, just sort of looking at all of this stuff and just having no idea what the future holds. And that's a very disorienting way to be. And I think people are losing sleep, and we know how important sleep is to our health. And I think people are experiencing the kinds of stress and anxiety that they have never experienced before. And I think that can be devastating to our ability to fight off something like a virus. So we're doing our best to sort of apply our skills to support, the people in our networks and their networks to get through this successfully.
So this is, let's jump into questions. Our first one came in, this one via email. How are commercial landlords affected and tenants in commercial space? On the news, all the talk is about housing and apartment, don't pay rent, can't be evicted. What about restaurants and retail tenants? Do they get relief?
I don't know what I don't know what they mean by relief. I mean, I think that if you can't pay your rent, you don't pay your rent, right? And if you are a landlord and you can't fill the space, you don't evict your tenants. But I think that we have to remember that we're all in this together. And, I think that courts would not be particularly interested in someone coming in trying to evict a tenant, as I said earlier. And at the same time, I think that tenants have to be sensitive to the fact that, on the other side of this, we're all going to have to figure out how to pull each other up by the bootstraps and get through it. Landlords are better off if there's more tenants, and tenants are better off if they've got a place that they can afford to work. So I imagine that there is going to be some kind of relief offered from Congress to help people pay rent. There's provisions in the current act that do support low interest loans to be used for things like paying rent, paying mortgages, et cetera, certainly paying payroll. But I also think that, at some point, what you'll see is a lot of people either figuring out how to reimagine their and renegotiate their leases to be more realistic based upon what the economy looks on the other side of this. And I also think that there will be compromises rather than lawsuits, or settlements rather than lawsuits, by companies that simply want to get through this and have a business on the other side, and landlords who are going to be sitting on a lot of vacant real estate.
Next question: could reform crowdfunding laws further and have some of the wealth from sovereign wealth funds flow into crowdfunding?
Well, you have to remember, sovereign wealth funds historically are huge. These are big, big, big amounts. And, with the exception of SoftBank and a couple of isolated others, venture investing and crowdfunding involves relatively small numbers. So in other words, if a sovereign wealth fund, wanted to invest in crowdfunding, that would be comparable to a sovereign wealth fund, essentially doing venture investing. As most people may or may not realize, the average return on a venture fund is not 5 million %. I mean, not all of them invested in Google and Facebook and what have you in the day. Those are the exceptions. The average return on a venture fund is like 5%, and I'm not sure that sovereign wealth funds are looking for those kinds of returns. I think there may be certain sovereign wealth funds that think that that venture investing is sexy, or that they need exposure to the venture world in their portfolios. But they're looking to make $50 million, $100 million, several $100 million investments all at once. And that just doesn't happen in the earliest stages of an idea. So I'm not positive what the question is, but what the current crowdfunding venture investing, if I understand the question, the current world is basically, it allows for small investors, and it allows for ventures through crowdfunding to raise very limited amounts of money. I think, around $1 million total. And so the answer to your question is, I don't think venture investing is attractive to sovereign wealth funds in the abstract. And I also don't think that that crowdfunding is necessary for sovereign wealth funds to invest in things that they want to invest money in.
How do you think that the investment world would change as it relates to invest in health tech? And what are the trends that will emerge as part of this crisis? How will this affect your clients? What are their struggles these days?
Wow. Okay, so do we want to take that? That's a lot to unpack. Do you want to take that one at a time?
Why don't we start with, how do you think that the investment world would change as it relates to invest in health tech? And what are the trends that will emerge as part of this crisis?
Well, I think health tech is already one of the most vibrant sectors in the venture world, biotech in particular, and on the heels of all of the genetic research and artificial intelligence work and big data analysis and deep learning that's evolved, we're seeing a lot of very innovative startup activity in and around all sorts of big innovations and big disruptive ideas, potentially disruptive ideas in biotech, certainly, everywhere, everything from, healthcare businesses and, data resources and, digitized healthcare records and virtual doctors and, disruption in the pharmaceutical industries. Companies like Honeybee Health are, providing pharmaceuticals for far less than traditional pharmacies and without insurance. So there's a lot of opportunity. Apparently there's a lot of fat in the pharmaceutical prices. I guess we knew that, but there's a lot of that going on, and certainly in the areas of research and look, it shouldn't take 18 months of human trials to perfect an effective vaccine, but it does. And one can imagine that we will develop vaccines that can be tested on a chip that simulates human genome and also simulates mutations and what have you. And I'm not a medical expert, so forgive me to those of you who are listening who think I'm completely off the reservation. But I believe that the areas of innovation that we'll start to see as a result of this, because there's already a lot of innovation going on in biotech, in the venture world, certainly in the early stage startup world that we see. I think you'll see a lot of attempts to address this. If necessity is the mother of invention, obviously pandemics are going to be on everyone's mind. I also worry that there's and I don't want to terrify people, but I also worry that there's someone in a kitchen somewhere in the world trying to figure out how to engineer the next pandemic virus and deliver it more effectively and have it be more virulent. And that is a reason to be concerned.
Yep. And then we'll talk, we've already tackled the other questions. Most of everyone, all of his clients, I think, are affected in some way, as all of us. So we'll move on to the next one. Who keeps real-time data on the core indicators as it relates to the economy? Is it the Fed, major banks, a group of think tanks?
Who keeps what? Who keeps
real-time data on the core indicators as it relates to the economy? And usafacts.org was the reference link.
Yeah, the answer is I don't know the answer to that question. I believe that there are a lot of companies trying to aggregate more reliable real-time data, which include some of the biggest players, obviously. Google and Facebook in particular both have large data collection capabilities, and so does Amazon. And so, to my knowledge, it's mostly the usual suspect. I'm sure there's lots of innovators in that space, but most of the real-time data is being maintained not as efficiently by governments and or military resources that we know of, but on the economy in particular. I think you're seeing the big banks rely on some of the some new big sources, but mostly it appears as though it's the Facebooks and the Amazons and the and the Googles of the world that are doing the most innovative work in this area.
What are your thoughts around terminating employees that are engaged in racist behavior online as a way to deter and discourage anger, hate towards Asians stemming from Trump calling this the Chinese virus, adding fuel to the fire?
Listen, I think racism is a valid basis for terminating. Racist behavior is a valid basis for terminating an employee under any circumstances. I don't really know that it has to be, as a specific result of this. It seems like, it doesn't need to be linked to Trump or to profiling of Asians or to, any of what's currently going on. I think we can agree that racist behavior is is unacceptable under any circumstances. So I'm not sure I understand the basis of the question.
How does the closure of colleges and schools affect the next group of lawyers coming into the industry and not being able to get real life experience?
How does the closure of colleges and schools affect the next group of lawyers coming into the industry? Let's see. I don't know that the closure of colleges and schools is going to do anything other than limit the number of lawyers coming into the industry. Not being able to get real life experience, I assume, means not being able to get a job. I think like every other aspect, there's going to be a contraction of the economy. And I think that, it's going to be a tough time to be looking for your first job over the next, over the foreseeable future. I mean, I think the overhang from this, as I said earlier, this will be the defining moment of our lives, and the next, it could be the next couple of decades before we, move beyond the overhang that this creates. I'm worried about people in jobs. I'm worried about people with no savings. I'm worried about people. I'm also worried that the economy will continue to proceed along a very dangerous trend, which is that income inequality will be exacerbated by this experience, and that people at the bottom may get some relief in terms of holding on to whatever minimum income they have. We may end up adopting Andrew Yang's proposal of creating a minimum basic income. It may suddenly make a lot more sense than it did to most people that didn't adhere to his philosophy not too long ago. Although his idea was one that was put forth under the Nixon administration by Milton Friedman, because what we do know is that people that have very little tend to spend everything they make and then some, and that goes into the economy, and that has a multiplier effect on the economy, and that it may be the best use of government spending, more so than buying a missile and putting it in a silo and having no multiplier effect. But I worry about the people in the middle, not the working poor and not the ultra rich, but the people in the middle, and that group of people is likely to contract a bit as many of them fall into the lower category. But I think those people are going to get squeezed. I think people that had savings and had investments and had property with mortgages are going to find a lot of it is going to evaporate, and or that their debt will exceed their assets, and they will find themselves, in spite of their success, falling back dramatically. It's not. This is not. I wish I had better news, but I don't see us looking particularly good for a while, and I worry that in a world of even greater income inequality, which is, by the way, what happened after the Depression, or during the Depression. I do worry that it took a world war to get us out of the Depression ultimately. I worry, and it was a world war, by the way, that prompted that set the German economy in a tailspin, and is what prompted their behavior, which led to World War II. So I worry about what's going to provoke the next global conflict, and what we have to look forward to. And I don't mean to be a pessimist. As I said earlier, I'm an optimist, but I think we have to come together and work really hard and focus on these challenges, and not think that when this is over, it's actually over.
All right, so leave it there. I don't see any more questions. We'll be pushing some of this material, the deck, some of the resources that Ken mentioned in an email if you've registered. Ken, thank you so much for coming on today.
Okay, everyone, feel free to flame me if you thought I was out of line. I have a thick skin. I'm a big boy.
You've got his details. You know where to find him online. And I'll be, I'm working on my book outline. Obviously got a lot more time, so we'll be in touch. And thanks for everyone for tuning in.
All right. Thank you, Ken. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Ken.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Ended the live as well.